Have you been working out for longer than a year and can't seem to get results? This is my most frequently asked question whenever somebody approaches me at the gym. And if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed. I've been in fitness for 20 years, and I hope you guys navigate the fitness world to crush your goals. Now, the number one question is always, I seem to hit a plateau. I've done everything right. I show up every day. I diet. Why can't I get results? And in my opinion, this comes down to a few factors, and you're going to want to stick around to the end of this video because hopefully this is going to crack the code that's going to lead to your best results. Now, you obviously want to start with a very well-rounded, structured routine. So this basically looks like training each muscle group twice per week, which allows for adequate rest and maximum muscle stimulation. So an easy way to digest this is, let's say that you're somebody that has 4 days out of the week to train. You can do something like a upper body, lower body, rest, upper body, lower body. Or if you have like maybe, 6 days out of the week, you can do legs, pull, push, legs, pull, push, and then have maybe like one active rest day. And you can kind of do this any way you want as long as you're hitting each muscle group twice per week. And this is going to allow for maximum results in my opinion. Now, you always want to mix up strength and hypertrophy. Strength is basically a lower rep, higher weight day that's focused more on intensity, and your lower rep day is going to be focused more on hypertrophy, which basically means you're in that 8 to 12 rep range, roughly about 65 to about 75% of intensity. So you're going to cover both bases, and you're going to allow for ideally 48 hours of rest in between hitting that muscle group twice. And that's going to give you your structure and then the amount of rest that's pretty much needed in between each session. So assuming that you do that, you're pretty much set when it comes to your program, and you want to stick to basically doing the same thing, but just progress over time. So you don't want to have a routine where you're constantly switching up your routine or like your exercises necessarily. You always want to base your workouts around heavy compound movements, as that's going to give you the best results, and then you can finish off with isolation work. Another common question I always get asked is, when can I implement my cardio? Because cardio, in my opinion, is very, very important, but it has its place. And if you're somebody that maximizes or trying to maximize your hypertrophy and muscle gain, you always want to do cardio at the end of the workout. This is going to allow for you to have maximum strength and energy going into the workout, which in my opinion is harder to do anyway. And then once you're kind of like burned out your glycogen, you're kind of in that fat burning state anyway, so you'll benefit likely more with cardio afterwards. Or if you're somebody that has a little bit more time in your schedule, perhaps you can do something like maybe going for a walk in the afternoon and talking to your friends, or doing something to where you have, your cardio. So assuming that you have all of that done, we're going to talk about your diet, because people think that they just can go into like a caloric deficit or a caloric surplus and they're going to magically just like get the results. And that's usually the case when you're in your first 3 years of lifting. And usually what happens is whenever you're new to the gym, you get what's called newbie gains. And so it's very easy to tack on muscle. And so you don't really need to know what you're doing in order to get results. But then over time, you have diminishing returns and it's a lot harder to achieve results, which basically means you need to start, having some sort of plan and where you're tracking your weights, because tracking, just like your weights, you also need to track obviously your calories. And so the best way I would kind of explain this is you need to have some sort of range to where you know what your body uses to maintain its body weight. So for this particular example, we're going to use 2,000 calories. So let's assume that you're trying to gain some weight. You obviously want to be in a surplus of calories, but how much calories do you need to be in? So assuming that you know whatever your body's calorie count is that you need to maintain body weight, from there, you're going to add about 200 to 400 calories, depending on how your results vary. So you want to give yourself about maybe 2 to 3 weeks for your body weight to kind of fluctuate and balance out before making any like drastic decisions and adjustments. And a good rule of thumb is if you're trying to gain weight or lose weight, you always want to aim for about half a pound to a pound per week after your body has already regulated. Because naturally, if you start bulking or cutting, you're going to gain a lot of water weight fluctuations in the first like 2 or 3 weeks, which is completely normal, so don't get scared by that. But you want to always eat according to your goals. So the easiest way to explain this is whenever you're structuring your routine, you need to progressively overload, so you're giving yourself more of a challenge every single time. So this can either be adding more weight, more sets, more reps, less rest time, and you want to pick and choose to see what makes the most amount of sense for you, because you don't always want to increase your weight or always increase sets or reps or whatever. So less is more in this regard, but you want to be very mindful of that, right? And so likewise, when it comes to your diet, you want to basically eat where, like I said, for this example, we're going to go with gaining muscle. So you're going to aim for 0.5 to a pound per week. So assuming that you're eating about 200 to 400 calories more per day, and you're getting that amount of weight, then what happens when you start plateauing is you're going to gradually increase those calories. So that might look like adding another 100 calories. And you want to increase it just enough to where you're you're in that sweet spot. And so that's going to mitigate how much fat you're building whenever you're building your muscle, because inevitably you're going to gain some fat whenever you're trying to gain muscle, and you're going to lose some muscle whenever you're trying to lose fat. So that's why that sweet spot of 0.5 to a pound is pretty much where you want to be ideally. Now, those are basically your structured routine and your diet factors. Now, the second, or I guess the third now, is something that you really also want to consider is your quality of sleep and your recovery, because that's equally, if not more important than the actual, implementation of your routine and your diet. So you obviously want to give yourself about 48 hours of rest in between hitting each muscle group. That's going to allow for maximum protein synthesis stimulation and just repairing of your fibers and muscles. So assuming that you have that intact, you also want to have a pretty consistent sleep schedule and hydration schedule. So ideally, you want to have about 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons of water per day. And then when it comes to your sleep, you want to have, ideally, if you can, 7 quality hours of sleep every single night. That's going to be your best surefire sweet spot to get the most amount of results. And I know that this is kind of like compact and it's a lot to digest. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll be monitoring them soon. And with that, that's what my little description and summary of how you can gain the most amount of results and just be very consistent with it. So again, hope you enjoyed the content. Smash the like button, share the video with a friend. I'll see y'all soon. Bye.